in the 1970s, there was a car called the Pinto. Are you familiar with this? Do you know that it's like the case that made Ralph Nader famous?
No.
Yeah, so
and
basically...
I don't even know that much about Ralph Nader.
So this is basically what Ralph Nader, this politician, or lobbyist, I believe he was a lobbyist, this is what he determined. He found that Ford had skipped out on designing the car in a different way, which would have cost them $10 a car extra, and so if they had just spent $10 a car extra, the car would not have exploded during certain rear ends, because there was like the gas tank was like right next to the end of the car. I mean, most gas tanks are there, but the way that this one was designed was causing these explosions. Very rare, by the way. Very, very rare. But it was happening significantly enough that it got got turned into a case in the government or whatever, got lobbied. And so basically he made this study where he determined, and I think it was less than $10, okay? It was like $3 for designing this in a different way would have done it. But Ford made a determination that they would rather pay the liability costs of a lawsuit than to change it. And therefore they made a calculation that human life was worth less than $3.
Oh my God.
Okay? That's like the claim that Ralph Nader and the anti-capitalists made.
Okay.
And so because of that, Ralph Nader was able to pass some legislation that forced car companies to spend more money on their R&D to make these problems go away. Anyway, so the argument is that they somehow were able to monetize life, which is not the case. They made a business decision because they said, this is how often our cars explode. This is how much the lawsuits where we are liable are costing us. And they said, well, fuck it. It's not worth it to spend these extra $3 because we make 10 million cars a year, and $3 per car is going to cost $30 billion or what, I'm exaggerating here, but it's going to cost some stupid amount of money, which is going to make us like potentially go out of business, or maybe not go out of business, but it could hurt our bottom dollar. And then if suddenly there's a recession, then we go out of business. Right. So that's how they think. It's not that they made a determination that they know how much life is, because if the government thought that life was that invaluable, then they would make a legislation that all cars must be tanks, and then no one would die. Except if you forced all cars to be tanks, then you would have to make all the roads have asphalt that can handle the weight of tanks.
And you'd have to make police have even more super tanks that could stop those tanks, because how would you ever pull anyone over?
You're right. And then could you afford a $300,000 tank? Because I can't afford a $300,000 tank.
No.
So basically 3 people would be driving on the road. Yeah, of course, you would eliminate all deaths on the road, but then at the cost of your entire society.
Right.
So it's retarded.
Yeah, and there would still be deaths for whatever random, so some rainfall or whatever, the tire blows, something would happen. A deer runs across the freeway and all the tanks crash.
But the point is that there is no value on human life, and that's not something you can accuse capitalists of doing. That's not how it works. On the other hand, government, and I won't get into it, but government does have a way of putting value on people's lives. They determine the value of people's lives all day long, especially during times like COVID.
In what way?
Oh, they have death panels.
Like
they have death panels.
Deciding.
Since they can print money out of thin air at infinitum.
They do get to decide.
They decide who lives and who dies.
Well,
Imagine if it costs $1 million a day to keep a particular person alive because they were in such a horrific accident that their heart was over here and their brain was over there and their eyeball was over here, and they could keep them alive because they have the technology. But the fucker costs $1 million a day to keep alive because you need like the most sophisticated computer nanotechnology to keep him alive, and that's how much that shit cost it cost gajillion dollars to develop, and now we are using it for this one guy. And basically, if you do the calculations, costing about $1 billion a day to keep him alive. The government would say fuck that. The taxpayers would say fuck that, and people would literally decide what the value of this man's life is. There's a difference there. Okay. Anyway, so Sorry for that little rant, but I did want to give you a real world example of how capitalists are accused of deciding money on things that they don't decide. And ultimately, what does that legislation do? It makes it prohibitively expensive to enter into new competition with Ford. You see, had there been no legislation when Ford's cars were exploding, then I could create a company and start making cars that were just $3 more expensive, but way, way safer. And I could market that as like, I'm safer, I'm blah, blah, blah. But I can't because I need to spend the $3 extra. I'm forced to spend all the money of all the legislation. So who gets a heads up? Well, yeah, the company that was started in 1890 of course, when there were no legislation, they made all the money, they amassed all the capital, then the legislation came in, and so like since there's no competition, like they just do it and they raise the price, and if you want a car, that's the cost. Like there's no, and it's like very, very few times have they been forced to have competition.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That any of that even happened. So
the Pinto's a very famous one. You would learn that in a civics class or in a economics class. You would learn that one.